yes, studying is really great, but there comes a point where your 501st leak code question is not going to make a difference.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have another special guest with us today. We're just going to have a conversation about software engineering as a whole and a little bit about his internship experience at Meta. So Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name's Andrew. I go to the University of Michigan. I'm a rising senior. So this summer I interned at Meta, and it was a really fun time. Excited to share.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the first question I had for you is just what made you choose Meta and what was your interview process a little bit like?
Okay, so in terms of choosing Meta, I basically stopped recruiting once I got the offer. So it wasn't really much of a choice. It was more out of laziness. But yeah, I was really lucky that Meta is a great company, and so kind of justified and stopped there. But the interview process was, I applied through the UMich job fair. So Meta comes like every year, and they give you 5-minute intervals to kind of talk to them, like just to drop your resume and ask like basically 1 or 2 questions. You don't have time for anything else. But the important part of it is that like it gives you sort of precedence in terms of whether they review your resume or not. And it just by that, since there's so many people applying, you get a decent advantage. So I would definitely recommend that for anyone who has a school with a job fair and the company's coming, definitely take advantage of that. But the interview process was you apply. There was a first round, which was just like online assessments, as pretty much every company does. And what Facebook does is they give you kind of a portal full of questions that are representative of certain things that they would ask. So there'd be a bunch of different categories, strings, arrays, like the typical stuff that basically every software engineer needs to know. And they give you a bunch of practice questions. So that's a really good way to practice. So after that, so then after the OA round, you have 2 rounds of interviews. Both of mine were no mic, no cam, or no cam and no screen sharing either. So we would just like code on a shared, essentially Google Doc, with like a little bit of structuring, just to make sure that like you don't cheat and copy paste code in, so they can see what you're typing at least. But they just ask you leak code style questions. I would say they were between easy and medium, so I may have gotten lucky, but that's just my experience. And the most important thing you want to do is be clear in articulating your answers. I would even say that like if you have 2 candidates, one answers about 80-90% of the question, but communicates well, and it's obvious that they know what they're doing, versus the second person who takes 5 minutes, or maybe not 5 minutes, who's like doesn't talk the whole time and kind of just codes in silence but does finish the question. They would rather the first person. They would choose the first person, even if like on paper you didn't finish the full question. Just because it's easier to work with this person.
That makes
sense.
They're
more like coachable in a sense. And they're also looking for teammates, right? They're looking for people who are willing to work with other people, other employees, and it's like if you can't do that, then
a little bit more of the collaboration aspect too. And I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, how you didn't really prepare too much, but what resources would you recommend for people wanting to prepare for like coding interviews or anything besides like the general like leak code, for example?
Well, okay, so I just want to mention Grind75 is really good.
Okay.
So it's a website where you can put in how many hours you want to grind per week and how many weeks you have to prepare. They'll give you a list of questions based on that. It'll just be like a split between easy, medium, and hards. And if you just follow that structure, it's really helpful. You can even just cherry pick the questions that you don't know how to do, so at least you save some time if you're really in a crunch. So that's a good thing. Another thing is like more strategic applying. What I did was apply to companies that I either had less interest in or that by some metric I felt had a lower hiring bar. And you can kind of use their assessments and their interviews as practice, because that's as close to the real thing as you can get. Like leak code's not guaranteed that it's going to show up, but if you go through like 4 or 5 rounds of applying, going through the online assessment, and then like doing maybe round 1 interviews, doesn't really matter if you get cut or not, because we're kind of assuming that these are the companies you care less about. Then you get a lot of practice. You're more confident when you go into these interviews. And like it shows in your communication skills. It shows in your coding skills. You don't blank out, So that's definitely preparation you can do. And it's very time efficient because you're already going to be applying anyway, right? So if you're like really crunched on time or you just hate leak code, I would recommend that.
What advice would you give to students who are like trying to stand out during career fairs within those like 5-minute time intervals that you could talk to a recruiter?
in going to a career fair by itself, I think it already makes you stand out because it shows some level of responsibility. It shows some level of interest just by you giving them a resume and just by you talking to them, right?
Yeah.
It's not very common for them to, especially in these 5-minute short, 10, even 15-minute, like basically conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare for them to find a candidate that stands out so much that you're like expedited to the next round.
Mm-hmm.
In general, what you want to do is you want to clarify like how the process is going to go, like the recruiter's expectations for a candidate. They'll generally tell you like, oh, we want someone who's skilled, who can communicate. But sometimes recruiters, like companies will look for specific things, specific languages, specific frameworks that you need to know or that they work in and prefer that you are experienced in. Stuff like that. Then you can take that information and highlight on your resume, or you can highlight it to the recruiter itself, like right then and there.
Nice, yeah. So, like, on your team, what was the culture like?
Yeah, definitely varies. So I was on an ads team focused on not showing your data to advertisers. So it was like your traditional product of like showing advertisers how much money their ads are basically generating. But they were doing it in a way, they had developed a new framework or this computation system that allows you to just only get the averages at the end of the result or at the end of the computation without being able to attribute like whether a specific person clicked on it, because like, you know,
the privacy.
Yeah, it's very important in privacy.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to know whether this specific user with a specific ID clicks on it, because like that's like not good for you to know.
Yeah.
And so I was working on the runners that were like shipped to advertisers. They could use to click buttons and essentially like run all these computations with configurations and whatnot. So, you know, that's kind of not related, but my team's culture was pretty good. It was pretty focused on how much like productivity you could get rather than the hours you put in. So if you could get all your stuff done in 4 hours, say like you come in 4 hours every day, you get everything done, people have a good impression of you, like it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
It's very not focused on like you must be in here 8 hours a day, because, you know, at the end of the like no one wants to waste your time.
Of course.
So
yeah.
And then
efficiency over like everything else.
Yeah. And the culture was like, I don't want to make it sound like too workaholic.
Mm-hmm.
Like my manager, my peers were like really supportive of me. They're really supportive of even the non-interns. So for example, like the new grads, they're really supportive of them who are like ramping up and learning everything, because there's a lot to learn. They're really supportive, and they generally don't judge you at all. Like they're very open to asking questions. Even the more senior engineers love when you ask questions. It's just you don't want to ask the same question twice or 3 times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in general, I would recommend. It depends on the team though. There's a lot of teams at a company like that, so
yeah.
You're always
any
gonna
company,
find.
there's always going to be like that one bad apple.
Yeah.
But
and the bigger it is, the more there are, but also the more better teams there are. So yeah.
Of course, yeah. So it seems like you really enjoyed your internship, but is there anything that you would have done differently if you could go back?
For the internship or for
For the internship, yeah.
Probably would have tried to talk to people outside my team more. Just because, like, the first 2 weeks, you're really trying to understand what's going on. And then the next 8, which is the meat of your project, is focused on, like, frankly, just getting the best rating you can for that return.
Okay.
You know, obviously, like, you want to have fun and all that kind of stuff and get used to it. But, like, for me specifically, it was just, like, I want to get a good rating so I can get a return offer.
Yeah.
I think that mindset is fine. It's just that working at a company specifically like Meta, or like any big company that you really want to work at, is such a great opportunity. I think you should take the time to you know, make the fullest of all the resources they have.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be, you know, like you can look into their code base. You know, you can ask other teams what they're doing.
Yeah.
You can even, like, you're an intern, they don't expect very much of you. They're down to show you. Right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So stuff like that, to reach out to more teams, and then in the framework of like wanting to get a better review and like wanting to get a better rating, like that also specifically at Meta, I don't know any other companies because I haven't worked there, but like they look very they like love when you work with other teams, specifically as an intern, because they don't expect you to do that. So they love when you can go cross team, when you can kind of like show impact, not just in your organization. So that's something I would probably do.
Did you do like coffee chats with like senior level managers? Or
See, that's what I would have wanted to do, but I didn't.
Okay. Yeah. Last general question: what advice would you give to students who are searching for an internship?
Yeah. Biggest one is to be confident in yourself. I know a lot of people burn themselves out by doing too much prep, by doing too much leak code. Because like, what if they ask a question that I haven't studied? What if this happens? What if this happens? And what I say to that is, yes, studying is really great, but there comes a point where your 501st leak code question is not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
I think because the interview is as much about the person you are going to be hiring as much as it is their skill.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to explain your solution clearly, to be able to come across as personable and someone that maybe the recruiter would even want to work with, because they are going to be the ones recommending you for this position, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you're a strong hire or not hire, stuff like that. So, just the more confidence you have in yourself, the more self-assured you look, it shows a better image, right? And in general, you prevent yourself from burning out, because you will be applying to a lot of companies. And that kind of relates to my second piece of advice, which is play the numbers. It's a lot to apply to 50, 60 companies, mm-hmm. and it is stressful, especially since if you get 30 assessments back that you have to do, right? But one, you can treat them as practice if you kind of treat it in the order of lower stakes companies first, the ones that I want to work in, around the area of early October, I would say is probably the best, because a lot of companies like to close on October 31st. So early October, maybe late September, if you need that time to prep, would be probably the best spot to apply to the companies you're really gunning for. But in general, as I kind of mentioned, use all those OAs as practice, use all those first round interviews as practice for these companies, for the early companies. Mm-hmm. And that should help you also reduce on the time you need to spend on lead code, reducing burnout, because I think probably the biggest obstacle to any recruiting cycle is just burnout. Yeah. It's you just don't care anymore. You kind of start mailing in those interviews. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, the recruiter is well, he doesn't seem to really care. You can say all you want, I have all of these characteristics that you want from me. I know how to code everything, but if they don't want to work with you,
it doesn't seem like they're passionate anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, thank you, Andrew, for being on the show. It was a pleasure getting to talk to you and picking your brain on these specific topics. And thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Enjoyed it.
Let's go!
One take wonder. Actually, it's